When you're using charcoal, rather than using an entire stick, I recommend breaking it in half. That way you have more control over what you're doing rather than using a large stick that's not allowing you to have fine detail and control. So what you want to do is start out as dark as you can, and then you gradually want to press less and less and less. And you'll see that it's hard to get a really wide range by just using your charcoal. So what you can do is take a small piece of paper towels and start doing the smudging with them. You can also try using vine charcoal, which I have here. This is vine charcoal. Vine charcoal is slightly different. It's much softer, more powdery. It lends very kind of warm values. So now I'm gonna use my charcoal and start working on this apple. I want to mention once again that the values from black to mid-gray are called low-key values, and then values from mid-gray to white are high-key values. And this is a chromatic value, basically value that varies in dark and light. When you're creating a composition of objects, you also have to pay attention to open and closed value compositions. Basically, an open value composition is if you have two objects, one in front of another or one side by side, but their value is very similar, and due to that they look like they're blending together. And this is called open value composition because they morph into one another, appearing as though they're creating one object. And closed value composition is when you have one object being significantly darker than the other and the edges are a lot more obvious. So this is called a closed value composition. So now I'm going to be working on my apple here. I'm going to start by lightly indicating the darks. If it helps, you can also draw the shape of the apple in pencil, if that's something that's more helpful for you. And also indicate the cast shadow of the apple. And here are my values for the cast shadow, which is significantly darker underneath the actual apple. So now I'm just gonna move around charcoal and use my piece of paper towel. So remember, when you're drawing any three-dimensional objects, you will usually have a highlight. You can have several highlights depending on your light source, but in my case I have only one highlight coming from the side because I have one main spotlight. So your highlight is the brightest section of your artwork, and then the side will have your darkest shadow, and then you will have a cast shadow. You will also notice in many cases that next to the very edge, even though your object will look dark there, you will have something called reflected light. And that edge will be slightly lighter than the darkest dark, and that will really make your object look even more round and three-dimensional. I have a kneaded eraser here, which is also considered a drawing tool. It looks kind of like a gray piece of gum, and when you open it, you knead it, and you use it to remove values to create very intense highlights, and you can also use it to make marks and textures. So here I'm gonna use it to move some values around and also create some highlights on the areas that perhaps I made too dark and I want them to be much lighter. So you can see you have to keep cleaning it in order to get it to effectively remove values from your object that you're drawing. It's also good to use just a small piece. You don't need a whole thing, and remember to constantly knead it. Now I'm going to go in and indicate the small tail of the apple. Once again, one side is much darker and one side where the light is falling is much lighter. You really want to emphasize that depth behind it, so you could even go in with a darker value. And I see all kinds of texture lines in the apple surface, so I'm gonna try to translate them here with my charcoal. The actual edge of the apple is light here, so I might emphasize it even more by making the background around it slightly darker. That will make your object pop even more off your page. Emphasize some of that edge. Sometimes you need to get in there with a charcoal pencil to refine your edges a little bit more. And let's say I'm happy with my product. You know, I could always go in and emphasize some of those really beautiful marks on the apple to make it appear more realistic. But another fun technique that you can try is using water in combination with charcoal. So all you have to do is add just a little bit of water over charcoal, and what it does, it dissolves charcoal and makes it look like ink. You have to be very subtle with it though, you don't want to overdo it. It's also a nice way to make your blacks really black. So I think it's a nice combination to have some really powdery and loose areas and some smoother, refined areas that you created with water. And you can also go in and, you know, add some of those marks with a brush. So try to play around and see what happens when you use charcoal.